That Friday night was destined to become the most intense and unforgettable night of my life, though I had no idea then just how deeply it would leave its mark on me. The house, usually filled with the everyday noise of a busy home, was eerily quiet. I had never appreciated the peace of our little home more than I did in that moment. The silence was profound, almost tangible, wrapping around me like a soft, comforting blanket. I could hear nothing but the rhythmic ticking of the clock in the kitchen, the faint rustling of trees outside as a light breeze blew through the night air. It was the kind of stillness that made everything else seem distant, as if the world outside didn't exist. Please share your thoughts in the comment section below. Each of your shares is not only a motivation for us but also contributes to spreading value to the community. I had been on my feet all week, balancing work, errands, and the demands of raising my son Daniel. By Friday evening, I was completely drained. My body ached from the constant movement, my mind exhausted from the endless to-do lists. All I wanted was to slip into bed, to find the release of sleep, to let my weary muscles relax. The day had been long, and the thought of finally resting was like a gentle promise I couldn't wait to keep. As I slipped into my pajamas, the comfort of my soft sheets called to me. I didn't even bother to turn on the bedside lamp. The darkness of the room was soothing. In the quiet of the night, I felt the weight of the week finally lift off my shoulders. I closed my eyes, ready to let the peaceful stillness of the night take me. I thought nothing could disturb the serenity of that moment. The house was as calm as it had ever been. For 8 years, I had learned to live alone with my son, Daniel, since the divorce. It wasn't that my ex-husband and I had a bad relationship. Quite the opposite, in fact. We just grew apart. Over time, our paths no longer aligned, and we found ourselves drifting in different directions. Despite our differences, we remained civil and cooperative for Daniel's sake. He was the center of both our worlds. Raising Daniel alone was, without a doubt, the most rewarding and the most challenging thing I had ever done. He was everything to me, my pride, my joy, my purpose. Smart, funny, thoughtful, and kind. I often marveled at how deeply he cared for others, how sensitive he was to the feelings of the people around him. He was a special boy, and I often found myself in awe of his maturity. But I won't lie, there were times when I felt the weight of my dual role as both mother and father. It wasn't easy being everything to him. There were moments when I wished there was someone else to shoulder the burden with me, to guide him when I wasn't sure of the right direction to take. But despite the hardships, the love I had for him made every challenge worth facing. That particular Friday night, I had never felt so drained. I could barely summon the strength to change into my pajamas before I crawled into bed. I was so tired that my limbs felt heavy, as if the bed was the only place I could be. I let out a long sigh as I settled in, allowing the cool sheets to embrace me. The house was utterly silent now. The only sound in the house was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Daniel had gone to bed hours earlier. He had finished his homework and played video games until he grew too tired to continue. As usual, he had curled up in his bed, wrapped in his own world of dreams and teenage thoughts. I thought to myself how peaceful the night was, how comforting the quiet had become. I could almost hear the gentle pulse of the night itself, steady and unbroken. It seemed that the universe had given me this rare gift of peace, of calm, uninterrupted by the demands of daily life. I had no idea then that this night, so calm and peaceful on the surface, would soon change in ways I never could have imagined. As I lay there, eyes closed, I felt a flicker of something not quite right, though I couldn't put my finger on it. It was as though the air itself had shifted, though nothing in the room seemed to have changed. The weight of the silence, the absence of sound, began to feel less comforting and more profound. A subtle tension seemed to grow in the air around me, but I couldn't quite identify its source. This night, this seemingly ordinary Friday night, was about to transform. What I thought would be just another evening of restful sleep would soon become a night of revelation, of emotions I had suppressed, and of a bond with my son that would stretch the boundaries of what I thought was possible. I had no way of knowing that as I lay there, tired and alone, the most unexpected of shifts was about to unfold, one that would change everything. Finally, after what felt like an endless week, I found myself with a rare moment to myself in my room. The house was quiet, and the evening had unfolded into a serene stillness that seemed to wrap itself around me like a blanket. The only light that filled the space was the soft, silver glow of the moon, peeking through the thin, curvy curtains. It bathed the room in a gentle, almost ethereal light, casting delicate, elongated shadows on the walls. The soft flicker of those shadows seemed to sway with the night, creating an ambience that was both peaceful and calming. I snuggled deeper into the warmth of my blanket, feeling the soft weight of it settle around me. The heat of the bed was a soothing balm for my tired body, and I allowed myself to sink into it. My mind began to wander, as it often did in the quiet moments before sleep took hold. Life had been relatively calm lately, a welcome change after the chaos and emotional storms of the past year. For once, I didn't feel overwhelmed by the constant pull of responsibilities. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. Since my divorce, things had been a struggle. There had been the pain of the separation, the burden of single motherhood, and the heartache of watching my son adjust to life without his father. But despite everything, Daniel and I had built a good life together, a life of love, laughter, and resilience. We had found our rhythm, our own little world in which we both thrived. Though the echoes of the past still lingered, we had forged something strong and beautiful from the ashes of what we once were. Daniel was almost 20 now, and it seemed like only yesterday he was a little boy, needing me for everything. Over the years, we had become incredibly close, more than I could have ever hoped for. He wasn't just my son. He was my confidant, my companion, the person who made the tough days a little easier to get through. His kindness, his thoughtfulness, his genuine care for those around him had only grown over the years. I was proud of the young man he was becoming, though at times I couldn't help but worry. Even now, at nearly 20, he still carried the weight of responsibilities on his shoulders that no one his age should have to bear. There were times I thought he'd taken on too much, shouldered too much of the emotional weight that came from the brokenness of our family. But Daniel never complained. He was always there for me, always showing up, always trying to make life easier for me. I smiled softly as I thought about him. He had a way of making everything feel better simply by being himself. I felt so lucky, so blessed to have him in my life. But tonight I was just too tired to dwell on any of that. My eyelids were heavy, and the pull of sleep was undeniable. The exhaustion of the week settled deep into my bones. I felt almost as though my body was too tired to move, too tired to do anything but surrender to the comfort of the bed and the quiet of the night. I closed my eyes, my thoughts fading into a hazy blur. Sleep was almost within my reach when suddenly, there was a soft knock at my bedroom door. It was light, tentative, almost as if it didn't want to disturb the peace. First, I thought it was part of a dream. But then the knock came again, gentle, yet insistent. I blinked, fully waking now, my mind catching up to the moment. The sound was real. And then, through the thin space between the door and the frame, I could make out the faint outline of Daniel standing in the dim light from the hallway. "Mom!" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it was enough to pull me from my sleepy haze. I sat up in bed, pushing the exhaustion to the side for a moment, trying to shake off the remnants of slumber. "Daniel, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice thick with sleep. I rubbed my eyes, still trying to fully wake myself up, but the concern in his voice had already grabbed my attention. It wasn't typical for him to come to me in the middle of the night, especially when everything had seemed so calm just moments before. He stood there for a moment, hesitating, as if he were unsure whether he should enter the room at all. Finally, he stepped inside, quietly closing the door behind him. His movements were slow, careful, as though he didn't want to disturb the stillness that had settled around us. There was a quiet unease in his posture, and I immediately knew something was bothering him. I couldn't sleep," he said, his voice small, almost reluctant. He was standing near my bed now, looking down, his hands stuffed into his pockets. There was a vulnerability in the way he stood, a vulnerability that was rare for him. Usually so composed, so mature beyond his years. Seeing him like this tugged at my heart. Since the divorce, Daniel had occasionally had trouble sleeping. It wasn't something we often discussed, but I knew it was a side effect of everything that had happened. His father's absence still hurt him, even if he never fully showed it. I could tell by the way his eyes would cloud over sometimes, by the way his shoulders would sag when he thought no one was looking. Tonight, I could see the sadness in his eyes, a sadness he hadn't let go of completely. It made my heart ache to see him like this, to know that my son, my strong, kind-hearted boy, was still carrying so much inside. I patted the empty space beside me on the bed, my voice soft, coaxing. "Come here," I said, trying to offer him the comfort I knew he needed. "You can stay with me tonight if you want." There was a brief hesitation. His gaze flickered between me and the bed, unsure. But after a moment, he slowly walked over and climbed onto the bed beside me. He curled up on his side, facing me, his face still pale in the dim light. I could see the exhaustion etched into his features, but there was something else too, something raw and unspoken. He was so tired, but he also seemed fragile, in a way that I hadn't seen before. As he lay there beside me, I could feel his tension, the weight of whatever it was he was carrying, pressing down on him. I wanted to reach out, to wrap him in my arms and make everything okay, but I knew that whatever he was dealing with, he would have to face it in his own time. All I could do was be there, be the one constant he could rely on when everything else felt uncertain. And as we lay there in the quiet darkness, I realized how much he had grown, how much we had both changed. This was no longer just the relationship between a mother and her son. It was something deeper, something more complex. I could feel the shift in the air, as if the bond between us had transformed into something new, something neither of us fully understood. But as we lay there, side by side in the stillness of the night, all I knew for sure was that we would figure it out together. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked gently. Daniel shook his head, his dark hair falling over his eyes. "No, I just wanted to be close to you." My heart felt warm. It had been a while since Daniel had wanted to be close to me like this, like when he was younger. I reached out and brushed his hair away from his forehead, smiling at him. "That's okay," I whispered, putting my hand on his shoulder. "You can stay as long as you need." He smiled back, but I could still see something bothering him, something he didn't want to talk about. I didn't ask him about it. Instead, I lay back down, pulled the blanket over us both, and let the quietness comfort us. We lay there for a while, enjoying the peacefulness. Daniel's breathing slowed down, and I thought he had fallen asleep. But then he spoke again, so softly I almost couldn't hear him. "Mom, do you ever miss him?" His question surprised me, but I knew he was talking about his father. It was a question I had avoided for years, one I didn't know how to answer. "I do sometimes," I admitted quietly. "But things weren't good between us, Daniel. You know that." He nodded, but I could tell he wanted to know more. "Do you ever think things could have been different?" he asked. I sighed, thinking about past regrets. "Maybe. But we can't change what happened. We have to move forward." Daniel looked down, playing with the edge of the blanket. "I guess I just wonder if maybe I could have done something different, you know? Like if I had been better." His words hurt my heart. I sat up and turned to face him. "Daniel, no. This wasn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong," I said seriously. He looked away, his voice a whisper. "Sometimes it feels like if I had been better, maybe Dad wouldn't have left." Tears came to my eyes, and I hugged him tightly. He resisted for a second, but then he hugged me back, burying his face in my shoulder. "Daniel, listen to me," I said, my voice shaking. "Your dad made his own choices. Had nothing to do with you. It was his decision, and it was never your responsibility. You've always been more than enough for me, Daniel," I whispered, my voice filled with love and reassurance. "You're everything to me." He nodded against my shoulder, but I could still sense the tension within him, the weight of years of unspoken pain and guilt. We held each other closely, the silence between us a comforting balm. Gradually, his body relaxed, his breathing deepening as he drifted off to sleep. But as he slumbered peacefully beside me, my mind raced, thoughts and memories swirling in the darkness. We had both endured so much, and yet amidst the quiet comfort of that shared embrace, an unexpected feeling stirred within me. A sensation I couldn't quite name. It was a warmth that spread through my chest, a connection that felt deeper, more intimate than the usual bond between a mother and her son. I tried to dismiss it, to focus on the rhythm of his breathing, but the feeling persisted, a persistent whisper that refused to be ignored. Morning arrived too soon, the soft light of dawn painting the room in gentle hues. Daniel slept soundly beside me, his face peaceful and relaxed, the tension of the previous night seemingly forgotten. I watched him for a moment, my heart swelling with love and pride. Yet that unfamiliar feeling lingered, a persistent undercurrent beneath the surface of my maternal affection. I slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb him, and made my way downstairs to prepare breakfast. The familiar routine of cooking offered a sense of normalcy, but my thoughts kept returning to our late-night conversation. Daniel had always been sensitive, but I hadn't realized the extent to which he had internalized his father's absence. The guilt he carried weighed heavily on my heart, a burden I wished I could alleviate. But it wasn't just the action that lingered in my mind. It was the way he had looked at me, the vulnerability in his eyes, the unspoken longing for something more. And if I was honest with myself, the warmth I had felt while holding him had stirred something deep within me, a connection that transcended the boundaries of our familial roles. I tried to push the thought away, reminding myself that he was my son. But the feeling persisted, a persistent whisper that refused to be silenced. Soon, Daniel emerged from his slumber, his hair tousled, his lanky frame still bearing the vestiges of adolescence. Yet there was a newfound maturity in his eyes, a hint of the man he was becoming. I greeted him with a warm smile, trying to mask the lingering emotions from the night before. "Morning, sleepyhead," I said, placing a plate of pancakes before him. "Morning," he mumbled, settling into his chair and digging into his breakfast. We ate in comfortable silence, the morning light casting a warm glow over the kitchen. I felt his gaze linger on me occasionally, but I chose not to broach the topic of the previous night. He seemed more at ease, more like himself, and I didn't want to disrupt the fragile peace. The peace we had found finally broke the silence. "Thanks for last night, Mom. I needed that." His vulnerability caught me off guard. "You never have to thank me, Daniel," I reassured him. "I'll always be there for you no matter what." He nodded, but his gaze remained fixed on me, an unspoken question lingering in the air. I wasn't sure how to respond, how to navigate the subtle shift in our relationship. There was a new intensity in his eyes, a yearning for a connection that transcended the traditional boundaries of mother and son. A part of me, a part one hadn't dared to acknowledge before, felt it too. After breakfast, he lingered at the counter, his fingers tracing patterns on the countertop. "Do you ever think things could have been different?" he asked quietly, his voice heavy with unspoken emotions. I sighed, the weight of past regret settling upon me. "Maybe," I replied softly, "but we can't change what happened. All we can do is try to move forward." Please share your thoughts in the comment section below. Each of your shares is not only a motivation for us but also contributes to spreading value to the community. Daniel nodded, his gaze fixed on his restless fingers. "Sometimes I wonder if I could have done something better, you know?" His voice was barely a whisper, laced with guilt and self-reproach. His words pierced my heart, and I couldn't help but reach out to him. I placed a hand on his shoulder, drawing him into a gentle embrace. "Daniel, you didn't do anything wrong. None of this was your fault," I reassured him, my voice thick with emotion. He looked away, his voice barely audible. "Sometimes it feels like if I had been better, maybe Dad wouldn't have left." Tears welled up in my eyes as I pulled him closer, holding him tightly. He resisted for a moment, then surrendered to the embrace, burying his face in my shoulder. "Daniel, listen to me," I said, my voice unwavering. "Your father's choices were his own. You are and always have been more than enough. His leaving had nothing to do with you." He nodded slowly, his body relaxing against mine. The tension in his shoulders gradually eased as he settled into the embrace. I felt that unfamiliar warmth rise within me again, a mix of relief, affection, and an undeniable sense of connection. The bond between us, once defined by the roles of mother and son, seemed to be shifting, evolving into something new, something neither of us fully understood but both instinctively felt. For now, I held him close, letting the moment linger without questions or explanations. I wasn't sure where this newfound intimacy would lead us, but I knew that life as we had known it was changing, and this was just the beginning. As I lay there in the darkness, enveloped in the warmth of my son's embrace, a profound realization washed over me. The delicate balance of our relationship was shifting, teetering on the precipice of something new and uncharted. A tremor of apprehension coursed through me, a whisper of uncertainty about what this transformation might mean for us. Yet amidst the apprehension, there was an undeniable sense of anticipation, a recognition that this was merely the beginning of a journey into the unknown. Dawn arrived with a gentle insistence, the soft tendrils of sunlight weaving their way through the curtains, rousing me from slumber. Beside me, Daniel slept peacefully, his face serene and relaxed, the burdens of the previous night seemingly forgotten. I watched him for a moment, my heart swelling with a familiar maternal love. Yet beneath that well-known affection, a different current stirred, a sensation I couldn't quite define. It was the same unfamiliar feeling that had danced at the edges of my awareness the night before, a sensation that both intrigued and unsettled me. I slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb his slumber, and made my way downstairs to the familiar routine of breakfast preparation. As I stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with practiced ease, my thoughts drifted back to our late-night conversation. Daniel had always been a sensitive soul, but I hadn't grasped the depth of his internal struggle, the way he had carried the weight of his father's absence, the guilt he harbored, a secret he had kept hidden for far too long. Now it weighed heavily on my heart. But there was more to it than that. There was a shift in his demeanor, in the way he had sought solace in my arms, a yearning for a closeness that transcended the traditional boundaries of mother and son. And if I was honest with myself, I had felt it too. A warmth that spread through me when I held him, a comfort that went beyond maternal instinct. I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. "He's just a boy," I reminded myself. "Your son." But the feeling lingered, a persistent whisper that refused to be silenced. Daniel finally emerged from his slumber, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. His hair tousled, a picture of youthful innocence. Yet there was a newfound maturity in his gaze, a hint of the man he was becoming. I greeted him with a warm smile, attempting to mask the lingering emotions from the night before. "Morning, sleepyhead," I chirped, placing a plate of golden pancakes before him. "Morning," he mumbled, settling into his chair and eagerly devouring his breakfast. We ate in comfortable silence, the morning sunlight bathing the kitchen in a warm glow. I could feel his eyes on me occasionally, but I remained silent, not ready to delve into the complexities of the previous night's revelations. He seemed more at ease, more like himself, and I didn't want to disrupt the fragile peace we had found. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice laced with gratitude. "Thanks for last night, Mom. I needed that." His vulnerability surprised me. "You never have to thank me, Daniel," I reassured him. "I'll always be there for you no matter what." He nodded, but his gaze lingered, a silent question in his eyes, a mirror of the unspoken emotions I had been grappling with. His eyes held a depth and intensity that transcended the familiar comfort of our mother-son bond. The day unfolded uneventfully. Daniel retreated to his room, immersed in homework and video games, while I busied myself with household chores. Yet the atmosphere between us had subtly shifted. It was an intangible change, a quiet tension, an unspoken acknowledgement of the deeper connection that had emerged. As the day transitioned into evening, My thoughts returned to Daniel, to his transformation from boy to young man, to the closeness we had shared the night before. The more I pondered, the more I realized that my feelings for him had evolved, transcending the boundaries of maternal love. That evening after dinner, we settled on the couch to watch a movie. The room was dimly lit, the flickering of the screen casting shadows across the walls. Images on the screen cast dancing shadows across the walls. We were mostly silent, content in each other's presence. But as the movie progressed, I became acutely aware of his proximity, the way his arm brushed against mine with each subtle shift. My heart quickened, and I tried to focus on the film, but the tension between us was palpable, a silent symphony of unspoken emotions. Halfway through the movie, Daniel shifted closer, his arm pressing against mine. This time he didn't move away. The warmth of his skin against mine sent a shiver of awareness through me. I glanced at him, and our eyes met. His gaze was filled with a newfound intensity, a reflection of the emotions I had been trying to suppress all day. Without conscious thought, I reached out and took his hand. Our fingers intertwined. He didn't resist, instead squeezing my hand gently, his thumb tracing a slow circle on my skin. The simple gesture sent a flutter through my heart, a sensation both familiar and exhilaratingly new. We sat like that for a while, hands clasped in the dim light, a silent testament to the shifting dynamics of our relationship. It was a turning point, a moment of unspoken understanding that transcended the boundaries of our familial roles. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that things were changing, and Daniel was no longer just my son. He was something more, someone I cared for in a way that defied definition. The movie ended, but we remained on the couch, the credits rolling unnoticed. I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. It was a small gesture, yet it felt profoundly intimate, a silent acknowledgement of the connection that was blossoming between us. "Mom," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. "Yeah," I replied. "I'm really glad you're here." His words, simple yet profound, echoed the sentiment in my own heart. I was glad he was here too, glad for this unexpected closeness. This newfound intimacy was both terrifying and exhilarating. As I lay there in the darkness, enveloped in the warmth of my son's embrace, a profound realization washed over me. The delicate balance of our relationship was shifting, teetering on the precipice of something new and uncharted. A tremor of apprehension coursed through me, a whisper of uncertainty about what this transformation might mean for us. Yet, amidst the apprehension, there was an undeniable sense of anticipation, a recognition that this was merely the beginning of a journey into the unknown. Dawn arrived with a gentle insistence. The soft tendrils of sunlight wove their way through the curtains, rousing me from slumber. Beside me, Daniel slept peacefully, his face serene and relaxed, the burdens of the previous night seemingly forgotten. I watched him for a moment, my heart swelling with a familiar maternal love. Yet beneath that well-known affection, a different current stirred, a sensation I couldn't quite define. It was the same unfamiliar feeling that had danced at the edges of my awareness the night before, a sensation that both intrigued and unsettled me. I slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb his slumber, and made my way downstairs to the familiar routine of breakfast preparation. As I stood at the stove flipping pancakes with practiced ease, my thoughts drifted back to our late-night conversation. Daniel had always been a sensitive soul, but I hadn't grasped the depth of his internal struggle, the way he had carried the weight of his father's absence, the guilt he harbored, a secret he had kept hidden for far too long. Now it weighed heavily on my heart. But there was more to it than that. There was a shift in his demeanor, in the way he had sought solace in my arms, a yearning for a closeness that transcended the traditional boundaries of mother and son. And if I was honest with myself, I had felt it too, a warmth that spread through me when I held him, a comfort that went beyond maternal instinct. I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. "He's just a boy," I reminded myself. "Your son." But the feeling lingered, a persistent whisper that refused to be silenced. Daniel finally emerged from his slumber, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. His hair tousled, a picture of youthful innocence. Yet there was a newfound maturity in his gaze, a hint of the man he was becoming. I greeted him with a warm smile, attempting to mask the lingering emotions from the night before. "Morning, sleepyhead," I chirped, placing a plate of golden pancakes before him. "Morning," he mumbled, settling into his chair and eagerly devouring his breakfast. We ate in comfortable silence, the morning sunlight bathing the kitchen in a warm glow. I could feel his eyes on me occasionally, but I remained silent, not ready to delve into the complexities of the previous night's revelations. He seemed more at ease, more like himself, and I didn't want to disrupt the fragile peace we had found. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice laced with gratitude. "Thanks for last night, Mom. I needed that." His vulnerability surprised me. "You never have to thank me, Daniel," I reassured him. "I'll always be there for you no matter what." He nodded, but his gaze lingered, a silent question in his eyes, a mirror of the unspoken emotions I had been grappling with. His eyes held a depth and intensity that transcended the familiar comfort of our mother-son bond. The day unfolded uneventfully. Daniel retreated to his room, immersed in homework and video games, while I busied myself with household chores. Yet the atmosphere between us had subtly shifted. It was an intangible change, a quiet tension, an unspoken acknowledgement of the deeper connection that had emerged. As the day transitioned into evening, my thoughts returned to Daniel, to his transformation from boy to young man, to the closeness we had shared the night before. The more I pondered, the more I realized that my feelings for him had evolved, transcending the boundaries of maternal love. That evening after dinner, we settled on the couch to watch a movie. The room was dimly lit, the flickering images on the screen casting dancing shadows across the walls. We were mostly silent, content in each other's presence. But as the movie progressed, I became acutely aware of his proximity, the way his arm brushed against mine with each subtle shift. My heart quickened, and I tried to focus on the film, but the tension between us was palpable, a silent symphony of unspoken emotions. Halfway through the movie, Daniel shifted closer, his arm pressing against mine. This time he didn't move away. The warmth of his skin against mine sent a shiver of awareness through me. I glanced at him, and our eyes met. His gaze was filled with a newfound intensity, a reflection of the emotions I had been trying to suppress all day. Without conscious thought, I reached out and took his hand. Our fingers intertwined. He didn't resist, instead squeezing my hand gently, his thumb tracing a slow circle on my skin. The simple gesture sent a flutter through my heart, a sensation both familiar and exhilaratingly new. We sat there for what felt like an eternity, our hands intertwined in the dim light. The room was enveloped in a soft, quiet ambience, the kind of silence that only exists between two people who have shared a lifetime of memories. Our hands fit together almost effortlessly, as though they had always belonged there, and the simple act of holding each other felt like a quiet declaration, an unspoken bond between us that needed no words. It was a moment of profound stillness, a rare pause in the whirlwind of life, where everything seemed to come into focus. There was no rush, no urgency, just the feeling of being in the present, fully aware of the shifting dynamics between us. I knew deep down that this was a turning point. It wasn't something I could easily articulate, but I felt it in my bones. Something had subtly changed, something beyond the scope of our typical mother-son relationship. It wasn't that I had stopped being his mother, or that he had stopped being my son. No, it was more than that. It was the realization that we were no longer just two people fulfilling the roles we had been assigned by life. We had evolved into something else, something far more complex and, in many ways, more meaningful. Daniel, once a little boy who needed me for everything, was now a young man, someone I could lean on just as much as he leaned on me. He was no longer just the child I had raised alone all these years. In that quiet moment, I could sense that our relationship had deepened, had grown into something that neither of us could have predicted. He had always been caring, thoughtful, and mature beyond his years, But now there was an unspoken understanding between us that we were no longer bound by the limitations of parent-child roles. We were equals in a way I hadn't fully realized before. The movie that had been playing in the background ended, the screen fading to black as the credits began to roll, but neither of us moved. We remained where we were, sitting together on the couch, enveloped in the quiet intimacy of the moment. The world outside seemed distant, irrelevant even. It was just the two of us, our hands still clasped tightly together, not needing to say anything more. The room was filled with the quiet hum of the night, the soft rustling of the air conditioner, the distant sound of the neighborhood settling into its own rhythm. And yet, in that silence, everything felt louder, more important. Our connection felt like a force in the room, a current that could not be ignored. I leaned my head gently against Daniel's shoulder, the weight of my tiredness suddenly catching up to me, but I didn't mind. His presence was soothing, comforting, like a warm embrace that I didn't even need to ask for. As I rested there, I could feel the steady rise and fall of his chest beneath me. His breath slow and even. It was such a simple gesture, yet it spoke volumes. The quiet intimacy of the moment was more than just physical proximity. It was an acknowledgement of something much deeper. We were no longer simply mother and son in the traditional sense. We had crossed into a new territory, a space where the boundaries of our roles blurred, where we were both people, both human beings navigating the complexities of life side by side. In that stillness, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, a deep appreciation for the connection we shared. It was a bond that had been forged through years of hardship and love, through the challenges of raising him on my own, through the quiet victories and the quiet struggles. And in this moment, in the softness of the couch, in the dim glow of the room, I knew that what we had was something rare, something precious. I couldn't quite name it, this new understanding between us, but it was undeniable. It was as if we had stepped into a new phase of our relationship, one that transcended the ordinary and ventured into something more profound. We weren't just mother and son anymore. We were two people who had been through a lot, who understood each other in ways no one else could. And in that understanding, there was a tenderness, a quiet affection that didn't need to be spoken, only felt. The credits continued to roll on the screen, but neither of us was watching anymore. Time seemed to stand still, and we stayed there, suspended in the quiet intimacy of that shared moment. It was one of those rare instances in life when everything falls into place, when the world feels like it makes sense, if only for a brief moment. I knew the future would bring its own set of challenges, its own changes, but for now, all I wanted was to hold on to this moment. The world could wait. In that silence, I could sense that we both understood the gravity of what had just shifted. There was no need for words, no need for grand declarations. It was simply the feeling of being exactly where we needed to be, together, in a moment that would forever be etched in our hearts. And somehow, despite all the uncertainties that lay ahead, that was enough. "Mom," Daniel whispered, his voice so soft, it was almost lost in the stillness of the room. I blinked, feeling a momentary jolt of awareness. It was as if his words cut through the quiet, demanding my full attention. I turned my head slightly toward him, the weight of his presence next to me suddenly more palpable. "Yeah," I responded, my voice barely above a murmur, the exhaustion of the day thick in my tone, yet somehow still full of warmth. His next words hit me like a soft wave, simple yet undeniably profound. "I'm really glad you're here." For a heartbeat, everything seemed to freeze. I didn't respond right away, partly because I wasn't sure how to, but also because there was something in his voice, in the vulnerability he allowed himself to express, that left me momentarily speechless. His words weren't just a casual statement. They felt like a quiet confession, a small but significant revelation of what he was feeling in that moment. "I'm really glad you're here." The words lingered in the air, hanging between us, weaving an unspoken thread through the space we occupied together. It wasn't just about being physically present, as any mother would be. It was more than that. There was an emotional depth to his words, a sincerity that went beyond what most would say. It was as if, in that simple sentence, he was acknowledging something more, something we hadn't voiced out loud before, not in these terms. It was the recognition of the unspoken bond that had always existed between us, but now felt more tangible than ever. I felt a lump form in my throat as I processed the weight of his sentiment. I could hear the genuine appreciation in his voice, the depth of the connection he was offering, and it took me by surprise. For years, I had been the one holding everything together for us both. He was my reason to keep going, my constant source of joy and responsibility. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, it was as though the roles had subtly shifted. We were no longer just mother and son in the conventional sense. In this moment, it felt as though we were two souls reaching for something more profound, something beyond the simple labels we had been carrying all these years. I looked at him, his face dimly illuminated by the faint glow from the hallway, and I could see that his eyes were softer than usual, more open, as if he were letting himself feel something he had kept guarded for a while. His usual mask of composure, his almost unshakable sense of maturity, was gone. He looked like the vulnerable young man he was, seeking comfort in the quiet refuge of our shared space. And in that instant I realized something. For all the years I had spent being strong, being the rock, the one he turned to for guidance and stability, he had quietly grown into someone I could turn to as well. His strength was no longer just a reflection of the way I had raised him. It had become something that emanated from him, and for the first time I could see how much he needed me, just as I needed him. I swallowed hard, my emotions swirling inside me. I turned my head away for a brief second, gathering myself before I could speak. It wasn't that I didn't want to express my gratitude for his words, or the emotions that swelled inside me. It was that I felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Fear because I didn't know how to navigate this new space between us. Exhilaration because it felt so new, so fresh, and yet so right. I finally whispered back, my voice thick with emotion, "I'm glad you're here too, Daniel. More than you know." The simplicity of my words couldn't fully convey the rush of feelings that flooded through me in that moment. The quiet vulnerability he had shared was something I had never fully acknowledged before. Terrified me in a way. This new closeness was uncharted territory. I had been his mother for so long, the one who guided him, who cared for him, who worried about him. But now, as I looked at him in the dim light, I realized that there was something new blossoming between us. An intimacy, a shared understanding, a connection that went beyond roles and responsibilities. It was a little terrifying, to be honest. The thought of shifting away from the structured, protective dynamic of mother and son to something that felt more equal, more raw, was both exhilarating and unnerving. And yet, there was a part of me that welcomed it. Deep down, I knew that this was just another step in our journey together. This was the inevitable evolution of our relationship, one where the boundaries we had carefully set were beginning to blur. But it wasn't a bad thing. It was a new chapter, one that held the promise of even deeper understanding, and perhaps a new kind of closeness that neither of us had fully imagined before. As we sat there, hands still clasped, the quiet hum of the night surrounding us, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the moment we were sharing. This newfound closeness, though intimidating, felt right in ways I couldn't yet articulate. It was as if, for the first time in years, we were no longer just a mother and son navigating life side by side. We were two people, both deeply changed by the experiences we had faced together, learning how to let the other in. And that was a rare, precious thing. And though I didn't know exactly what the future would hold, I felt certain of one thing: things were never going to be the same between us. And that wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace. Thank you for staying with us. If you find it interesting and useful, please subscribe, like, and share so you don't miss the next video. Thanks.